The Vanishing Coin.
Dr. Herbert Hopkins was sitting alone in the living room of his main home on September 11th, 1976. His family had gone to a movie, and he had a few hours to himself that he planned on using to review some audio recordings he had made over the last few months. You see, Dr. Hopkins was a renowned allergist and multiple sclerosis researcher as a day job. But in his free time, he pursued another interest: hypnosis. He had consulted on cases before, but none as interesting as the one he was currently working on. A man by the name of David Stevens from Oxford, Maine, had claimed he was abducted by aliens in 1975, and Herbert had been asked to hypnotize Mr. Stevens in an attempt to gain answers regarding his case. These recordings were what Dr. Hopkins was looking forward to reviewing that night. But before he would have a chance to begin, he received a call from a man claiming to belong to a regional UFO investigative group. The man also claimed to have knowledge of the Stevens case, and asked if he might visit the doctor that evening at his home to discuss it. Hopkins agreed to meet with the stranger. He hung up the phone, got up from his chair, and opened the main door, in front of which was a glass door. He wanted to see the stranger as he approached the house, but as he looked up through the glass pane in front of him, he saw a man coming up the walkway towards his home. The man wore a bowler's hat, a dark navy suit, and dark gloves. The doctor was stunned at how quickly the man had gotten there. There were no public phones nearby, and no car parked in the street. Even with a car, there was no way someone could have called him on the phone and then arrived at his house that quickly. He thought it was strange, but greeted the man nevertheless. They went inside, sat down, and at the stranger's request, began discussing what Hopkins had learned about the Stevens case. He did most of the talking. Occasionally, the visitor would remark, "Yes, that's how I understand it," in response to a point he had made about the case. He noticed that the man spoke in a dry, monotone voice. He would later describe it as lifeless, cold, and machine-like. As their discussion continued, Hopkins watched the strange man brush the back of his glove across his mouth. Glancing to his glove, he noticed a red stain on the back: lipstick. This immediately drew his attention to the man's lips, or more accurately, the fact that he had none. His mouth appeared like a slit. The red lipstick smeared across his mouth had been worn to give the false appearance of lips. The conversation carried on while he silently pondered who this man was. Several minutes later, the visitor pointed at Hopkins, who had his hands in his pockets, and spoke. "You have 2 coins in there." Hopkins felt around in his pocket and confirmed that he did indeed have 2 coins in his pocket. The strange man told him to remove one of the coins and place it in his hand. He did as requested, while the man watched him intently, and as he looked at the coin in his hand, he saw it take on a fuzzy appearance, and just moments later, it vanished. "Neither you nor anyone else on this plane will ever see that coin again," the visitor muttered. "That was a neat trick," Hopkins responded. The visitor then asked him if he knew anything about the Barney Hill alien abduction case of 1961. He said he knew a few details, but that he believed Barney Hill, who had passed away years earlier, had died of a heart attack. The man looked at him blankly and said, "Barney Hill died because he did not have a heart, just as you no longer have a coin." The stranger then told Dr. Hopkins that he had tape recordings regarding the Stevens case and that he would destroy all of them. The stranger didn't ask if he had recordings, he just knew, somehow. The doctor grew more concerned by the statements and the demeanor of this mysterious man in his home. The visitor never said he would return, but stated that he would know when the tapes had been disposed of. The stranger suddenly stood and spoke in an odd drawl. "My energy is running low. Must go now. Goodbye." And with that, the man headed for the door. Dr. Hopkins followed him to the door as he left, watching him grip the railing and fumble weakly down the walkway to the street. He turned and walked off in the opposite direction from which he had come. The doctor watched as he disappeared around the corner, and moments later, a quick flash of bright blue light lit up the sky. Shortly after the encounter, Hopkins destroyed all of his tape recordings regarding the Stevens case. He later admitted that he wished he hadn't, but at least he never saw that man again. If you are enjoying the story so far, quickly hit that like button to let me know you want more. Okay, now back to the story.
The International Flying Saucer Bureau.
Dr. Albert Bender was a bit of a strange young man. He had served in the U.S. Army Air Force during World War II as a stateside dental technician. After his honorable discharge in 1943, He, his mother, and his stepfather relocated to 784 Broad Street in Bridgeport, Connecticut. He was living in the attic of his family's home and had gotten a new job as chief timekeeper at Acme Shear Company, the world's largest manufacturer of scissors. As a strange ode to his job, he decorated his room with an assortment of 20 chiming clocks. Every 15 minutes, half hour, and on the hour, the house was filled with the clanging of bells. Bender's eccentricities would only grow as he reached his late 20s. His room was decorated with faux skulls, shrunken heads, and odd art pieces he had created himself. He became enamored with ghost stories, horror movies, and witchcraft, eventually dubbing his room his Chamber of Horrors. Sparked by the string of UFO sightings during the late 1940s, Albert was prompted to start the International Flying Saucer Bureau. It was one of the earliest and most successful groups of its kind. It grew quickly and contained some notable names of the time, including Eddie Rickenbacker, a World War I flying ace and CEO of Eastern Airlines. The group even attempted to recruit Albert Einstein, who eventually declined the invitation. By late 1952, the group had 600 worldwide members, with Bender at the helm as president. Bender then started a newsletter called the Space Review that was sent out to all members quarterly, discussing UFO sightings and offering theories about the origins of these strange objects. However, shortly after starting the group in the newsletter, Bender would find himself plagued by problems. Ill health and odd phone calls became a common occurrence for him. He claims he began receiving telepathic messages that tormented him all throughout the day. One night, while out at the local movie theater, Bender found himself being watched from a distance by a strange man with glowing eyes. As he walked home, the man shadowed him until he got to his front door. He looked back for the man one last time, but he was gone. On other occasions, the telepathic messages he received put him into a hypnotic trance, and he would watch himself levitate off the ground in his room. His room would also fill with a sickening odor, the stench of burning sulfur. Bender continued to press forward with his research and the Space Review. He put out a request that all members participate in a reading of a letter that he had penned in the quarterly newsletter at a specific time and date, 6 o'clock in the evening on March 15th, 1953. The letter read, calling occupants of interplanetary craft that have been observing our planet Earth. We of IFSB wish to make contact with you. We are your friends. Albert's goal was to connect with these extraterrestrial beings via the simultaneous thought projection of hundreds of members. This strange request would eventually become a cultural phenomenon that sparked multiple mainstream songs and a tradition that many UFO enthusiasts continue to participate in today. The tipping point for Bender would come as his room once again filled with the smells of sulfur, and he received a telepathic message telling him to cease his delving into these strange matters. He ignored the warning and announced that his July issue of the Space Review would hold a startling revelation concerning UFOs and the government's involvement in cover-ups. But the story was never published. Just before he had a chance to announce his findings, Albert was visited by 3 men, all in black. The men made it clear that he was to stop publishing his work immediately. The 3 men then sent him a similar message telepathically. They walked his home and confiscated everything related to his newsletter or extraterrestrial research. As they left, Albert noticed a yellow fog and a strange smell of sulfur in the attic. Dr. Bender was unnerved by the encounter and all the strange activity he had been experiencing, and just a year and a half after starting the International Flying Saucer Bureau, Albert shut the organization down. The newsletter ceased, but not before one final cryptic message was sent out to its members. The mystery of the flying saucers is no longer a mystery. The source is already known, but any information about this is being withheld by orders from a higher source. We would like to print the full story in Space Review, but because of the nature of the information, we have been advised in the negative. We advise those engaged in saucer work to be very cautious. And with that, the International Flying Saucer Bureau, the Space Review newsletter, and Dr. Albert Bender's research came to an end. Albert relocated to California shortly after the events. His home at 784 Broad Street has long since been torn down, and few traces remain of Albert's endeavors during the early 1950s. Dr. Bender passed away at the age of 94 on March 29, 2016, and many of the details of his story appear to have died with him.
The Maury Island Incident.
In the afternoon hours of June 21, 1947, Harold Dahl was on his patrol boat with 2 other crewmen, his son and his son's dog. He was coasting along the waters of the Puget Sound that surrounded Maury Island in Washington state. The Puget Sound at the time was filled with floating logs that had escaped from log jams that were waiting to be turned into lumber by nearby mills on the shore. Dahl and his crew were tasked with gathering up these stray logs and returning them to the mills in exchange for a salvage fee. Dahl was scanning the waters as the boat slowly approached the eastern shore of Maury Island when something in the air caught his eye. He looked up and saw 6 donut-shaped reflective metal objects about 2,000 feet above him. They appeared to be around 100 feet in diameter. While 5 of the objects hovered at altitude, one of them began descending slowly until it was approximately 500 feet above them. Not knowing what he was looking at, Dahl brought the boat to shore. He took out his camera and snapped several photographs. The lower ship maintained its position for around 5 minutes while the others circled above. Then another of the craft that were circling in the air descended down to the lower ship's level. The two seemed to touch and maintain contact for several minutes before there was a loud thud. Suddenly, thousands of pieces of what Dahl thought were newspapers dropped from the inside of one of the ships. The debris was scattered across the lake and on the beach. He quickly went to recover some of the debris and realized that what he was looking at were not newspapers, but rather strange, thin white sheets of some sort of metal. In addition, the craft had dropped around 20 tons of another strange, dark-colored metal that Dahl said had the appearance of lava rock. When the lava rock hit the water, hot steam erupted. They tried to take cover after several pieces had landed on their boat, damaging it. However, some of the debris hit his son on the arm, hurting him severely, and another piece killed the dog. After the debris had cleared, the craft were gone as well. Dahl and his crew made their way back towards the dock. As soon as they were home, Dahl contacted his supervisor, Fred Chrisman, and told him about the events. He gave Fred his camera to have the film developed. However, the negatives had spots on them that had the appearance of radiation burns. Crispin made it clear that he did not believe Dahl's story, but he went back out to Maury Island to gather additional samples. While he was searching, one of the craft appeared overhead. It floated, motionless, as if it were watching Crispin while he gathered up debris. The following morning, Dahl was visited by a strange man in all black who invited him to a restaurant for breakfast. While they ate, the stranger did not ask any questions of him. He simply recounted the entire story of what had happened to him the day before, and then explained that he was to keep his mouth shut if he didn't want anything unfortunate to happen to him or his family. Oddly enough, Dahl proceeded with his story and was able to get in contact with Captain Lee Davison and First Lieutenant Frank Brown of the U.S. Army Air Force, both of which were intelligence specialists who then flew up to meet with him. They listened to his story and reviewed some of the strange debris samples he had recovered. The two men would then confirm that Dahl might actually have something here. Later that night, the two military officials would hop on a B-25 bomber that would crash around 20 minutes into the flight, killing both of them. Some of the strange metal debris that Dahl had recovered had been on board. Locals came forward after the incident and claimed to have heard anti-aircraft gun used to shoot down the plane and suspected a government cover-up. The FBI and Air Force both investigated the crash and determined it to be an accident. The FBI then warned Dahl and Crispin that if they continued telling their story, they would be prosecuted for perpetuating a hoax that cost the lives of two military officials. Dahl and Crispin then made a statement claiming that they would come forward and say the events they witnessed were a hoax to avoid any further trouble. This was taken as an admission that the events they described were fake, but in later years, Dahl would clarify that the story was absolutely real. Investigators would visit the crash site many times over the years, but none of the strange debris that was on board would ever be found. Are the men in black real? If so, who are they? Where are they from? And why do they want to silence researchers and witnesses of supposed alien encounters? Leave us a comment and let us know. Thanks for watching.